Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 14th, 2020, and we are officially 50 days away from the 2020 presidential election, which means we're due for a 2020 Electoral College prediction. So, on this map, we're going to go through all of the swing states and talk about why I think that Joe Biden will do well in certain states and why Donald Trump will do well in some other states. Now, if we're looking at this general electoral map, it generally doesn't change. If you're new to my channel, if you're seeing this video or an election prediction for the first time, many states in the American electorate end up voting very similarly to how they have in the past. If we're looking at states on the West Coast, I think many of us know California is stereotyped as a Democratic state, as are states in the Northeast. And then if we look around the middle of the country, we see a lot of red. So first things first to say, land doesn't vote. Just because a state is bigger does not mean that it has a larger electoral college presence, meaning county-wide maps should not be used in terms of determining the outcome or who should have won the presidency, because population centers are a very real thing in terms of major cities. Besides that point, we're going to be looking at states ranging all the way from Nevada as a swing state, going down to Florida, all the way up to Maine. So this election is very different from the ones we are used to, which is exactly why we have 231 toss-up electoral votes. In a given election year, we normally wouldn't see, or at least a normal election year, we generally wouldn't see Texas as a toss-up. We wouldn't see Georgia as a toss-up, and generally the Democratic Party, or at least they used to, would have had a hold on the Rust Belt. Donald Trump and Joe Biden have expanded their territories, benefiting them both in different ways. Donald Trump was able to demolish the Blue Wall back in 2016. These were states that voted for the Democrats. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, 24 years, Michigan, 28 years. We were talking about, actually, it might not have been Michigan, but, 24 to 28 years across these three states in particular. And I think it's pretty substantial to know that Donald Trump was able to take these areas, voting for Democrats for decades, and flipped it red in a year where nobody thought he would even come close to winning the presidency. Moving past that region, what the Biden campaign and the Democrats have done in the past 4 years was revolutionize the electoral map as we know it. They took a number of likely Republican states from 2016, Iowa, Ohio, Georgia, and Texas, and made them toss-ups in this election. Texas is within a percentage point. Iowa, Ohio, and Georgia are within 2 percentage points. I think that is super substantial. Moving past, those, the rest of the swing states are pretty general: Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico. But the Biden campaign actually has a pretty strong grip on some of these states. Let's talk about some of these likely states. In New Mexico, Colorado, and Virginia, the Biden campaign has a very strong hold on these states. Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, Clinton states in 2016, Democratic states in the House in 2018. They had governor elections between Trump's presidency, or in between his first term. All went to the Democrats. They had Senate races, went to the Democrats. Overall, state legislature races went to the Democrats. So when we're looking at Virginia, when we're looking at Colorado, we're looking at New Mexico, these are states that used to be competitive, absolutely, but are not so much this time around, and probably won't be for the GOP for the next couple of election cycles, just because of how far they've moved to the left. The only state I realistically could see maybe return to being mildly competitive would be Virginia. Other than that, what we see in these states is that the Democratic Party is going to, solidify their hold on these states even past this election. We would be talking about a landslide on the national popular vote for the Republicans in order for them to have carried, Colorado and New Mexico in the near future. But for the Republicans, they do have some states that I actually need to move down from being safe down to likely. I normally characterize Missouri, Indiana, South Carolina, and Mississippi as likely. Why? Well, we're probably going to see Obama 2012 type numbers across all of these states. We're going to see very, high black turnout, numbers that could be comparable to 2012 or 2008. And in fact, it was higher in 2012 than it was in 2008. Just Obama won less white voters. And what Biden has shown us is that he is improving amongst white voters on top of the expected increased turnout from minority voters. While Biden may be minimally, reducing his margin in terms of Hispanic voters and black voters by 1-2%, them coming out 6-7% more than they did in the past will make all the difference, and it will honestly make up completely for that 1-2% that is currently undecided or not voting in this election. But for Indiana, Missouri, Mississippi, and South Carolina, I used to characterize them as safe, not so much anymore. But we actually have 2 additional states to characterize as likely. That are the states of Montana and Alaska. Both of these states actually have a very interesting dynamic because they're competitive on the House level, they're competitive on the Senate level, and Alaska was a likely state in 2016. So don't think Alaska was safe for Trump. It was a 14-point margin of victory. In Montana, it was roughly 19-20%. But what we see across all of the statewide races here, including the governor's race, is that it is absolutely competitive competitive, and the Democratic Party has been funneling a lot of money in there. They may not have nationalized the Senate race for good reason, but, for Montana, we likely could see it move down below 15%. We're talking 13, 14% for Donald Trump in terms of a margin of victory over Joe Biden. So let's talk about some other likely Democratic states. At this point, I would characterize Maine at large as a likely Democratic state, Maine's 1st district as a safe district, and New Hampshire as likely. Honestly, Donald Trump has been spending very little money across a number of these swing states, as we've seen. He's in trouble in terms of fundraising. The Biden campaign has done so well in terms of fundraising. I think the last quarter they raised $365 million. $365 million in 2016. Hillary Clinton had upwards of $700 million through Election Day, but Joe Biden is on track to surpass that by a very large margin. This could be one of the most expensive elections in history, if not the most. And Joe Biden has a very strong grip on the northeast part of the United States. And what we've seen from Trump is that he is focusing and he's playing defense. He's not going on the offense in a number of these Clinton states from 2016. While New Hampshire was close, Biden's numbers are significantly higher than Hillary Clinton's in this state. His approval rating is higher everywhere. He's just all around a better candidate than Hillary Clinton was for the time period. So I will say Joe Biden is probably going to carry New Hampshire by a likely margin and move Maine back into being a likely margin for the Democrats. So that puts Biden at 216. Trump is at 125. We actually have some other states to talk about characterized as, lean or likely, but we have one final state that I would say is likely. And I think to the surprise of many people, it's a Trump state from 2016. It's the state of Michigan. Now, Michigan itself is a very interesting state. It was the closest state across, I think the closest state actually, no, I know it was the closest state in the entire 2016 presidential election. 10,800 votes decided that Donald Trump would carry Michigan's 16 electoral votes out of the roughly, I think, 3 to 4 million cast. When we're looking at Michigan, Trump's approval rating is abysmal here. Gretchen Whitmer is still a popular governor. She was in firm opposition to President Trump. Biden only has to remind these voters that, he bailed them out, a decade ago, less than a decade ago, or actually around a decade ago. But, that's something that will attest to Biden's name in this state particularly. Donald Trump only narrowly won the state against a traditionally what would be a strong candidate, but against Trump, an obviously weak candidate. I think Biden is going to do very well in this entire Rust Belt region, but I think his true shining star, his true, state that flips from the Trump campaign from 2016 into the Biden column is Michigan. And I think this is the state that really shows how much support Joe Biden has across the entire white working class population across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. I think Michigan is going to be the most left-leaning state in this election. So that's 16 electoral votes. That puts Biden at 232. There are some other Clinton states from 2016 we will get into, but let's talk about some states where Donald Trump can do well in. When we're looking at the electoral map, you have to take a look at Maine's 2nd district. This is an area where the Democratic Party really lost a lot of support from Obama's numbers down to Clinton's numbers. It was super significant. Maine's 2nd district was a likely Obama district in 2012. It moved over to be a likely Trump district. It actually was a 10-point margin of victory. In fact, I printed out all of the 2016 margins, not for this video, just because I wanted to look at something when I was bored and possibly memorize it. Whereas Maine's 2nd district, here we are, a 10.29% margin for Donald Trump in this state. This was a likely Obama district in 2012. We're talking a 15-point swing, at least, in this district. So Maine's 2nd district, I think will go to Trump by a lean margin, but there are some other states that I think that Trump has maybe not so much, dominated in, but he's definitely done better than he has in the past when we're talking about these states and their current data. The states I'm talking about are Iowa and Ohio. These are 2 states where the Trump campaign won by pretty significant margins. Looking back at the sheet, I can tell you the exact margin in Iowa. Iowa was actually larger than Texas in terms of a margin of victory for Trump, and it was 9.41%. Ohio, an Obama state from 2008 and 2012, went to Trump by 8.13% in 2016. 8% in a state with 18 electoral votes that traditionally is a swing state, that Trump, I still think, is the current favorite to carry both Iowa and Ohio. Generally, they vote in unison. Occasionally, they do, move across from one another. Take a look at 2000. But when we're looking at Ohio and Iowa, these states are likely to vote the same, and for the same reasons. Donald Trump is probably going to lose a pretty significant portion of those that margin group that pushed Trump over the top in 2016, but it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to overcome a nearly 10-point victory in Iowa from 4 years ago, a nearly 9-point victory from Ohio 4 years ago. So I will say the Democratic Party is probably going to do better than they did in 2016, but honestly, that residue support for Trump is going to be enough to put him over the top as it stands today. So Iowa, Ohio, go to Trump. He's at 150. He's in nowhere near a competitive position until we take a look at Texas. Now, this is a state that went to Trump by 9% in 2016, 8.99% if you want to be specific, but Trump is probably going to carry this state as well. We're looking at a state that traditionally votes for the Republican Party. And yes, Biden is doing very well. Let's take a look at Texas in particular. He's doing very, very well. Biden's only down 1% in a state that went to Trump by 9% in 2016. And the polls actually in 2016 were wrong in Texas. They were off by 3%. They were within the margin of error, but you do have to acknowledge that they did expect Trump to carry it by a larger margin than what he actually received. It went from 12 down to 9, which means if you adjust these current polls for how wrong they were 4 years ago, Biden wins Texas. But realistically, it's still Texas. It's ruby red, and in a presidential election year, we're going to see the Republican Party in full force. I think Biden will come within, 5%, but we're not going to see Biden flip this state. And honestly, I think that while Biden doesn't have too much to worry about in terms of marginal support lost amongst Hispanic voters nationwide, he should worry about it in states like Texas and Arizona and Florida, because it very well could make all the difference for who wins the election. We're going to halt some of the lean Republican areas and talk about the lean Democratic areas. I don't think these are too surprising to anyone, but this is what is going to put Joe Biden over the top. There are no tilt states that are going to be the Electoral College breaker, but Virginia is characterized as likely. Colorado is characterized as likely. New Mexico is characterized as likely. New Hampshire is characterized as likely. Why aren't Minnesota or Nevada? Well, the Trump campaign is going to be heavily targeting Nevada. And like I said, Biden is struggling with Latino voters. Check the top right of the screen to watch that video. But the reason for that is because of the fact that the Biden campaign has done very little to reach out to the Latino community. It's very difficult to vote for someone when the opposition party is reaching out to you all the time. When we're talking about the Trump campaign, that's one thing that they're doing very differently from the Democratic Party, which is groundwork. And while the Trump campaign is practically broke at this point, I will tell you that much, they still have a lot of energy and a lot of volunteers that will do a lot of work for them across a number of these states. Looking at Nevada, I still think that Biden is going to carry it. It's traditionally a swing state, but we all know how it's going to go, and history tells us that it's going to remain in the Democratic column. Trump has not gained off his 2016 support. Even if you take a look at it, being a Trump supporter, you can't draw a map where Trump is going to gain more electoral votes. Why? There is nothing, absolutely nothing indicating that he would be doing better than where he was 4 years ago. A lot of times, this is a gut reaction from a number of people who may support a certain candidate. You overestimate their support. But take a look at the data. Literally every single state Trump is doing worse. And nationally, Biden is up 7%. And I get it. A lot of people don't trust the polls. That's entirely up to you. But you can't pick and choose to be, believing what data is correct. Because in 2016, the national popular vote polls were correct. Every single state was either within the margin of error if it was inaccurately predicted, which was only 3 out of the 50 states, and only 1 out of the 50 states was actually polled drastically wrong, and that was Wisconsin. Nevada actually overestimated support for the Republicans in 2016, and get this, we hit 2018 and the same exact thing happens. We're talking about Dean Heller overestimated, expected to win on election day in Nevada, didn't happen. Taking a look at the governor's race, the Republican was ahead. Steve Sisolak is the incumbent governor. He's not a Republican. So when we're looking at states like Nevada, we can expect Trump's numbers to actually go down from what the polls are predicting him to, lose to Biden by. And if Biden's up by 6, they have absolutely nothing to worry about, to be completely honest with you. And the same goes for Arizona. What we saw in Arizona in 2008 and 2018 and 2016 was that Republicans are overestimated in these polls. And I would hate to be a Republican that's being overestimated in, a state where the Senate election is down 10% for the Republicans. In the presidential level, where the Democratic candidate, someone who the last time a Democrat won in Arizona was 1996. 1996, Bill Clinton was president playing the saxophone at the DNC was the last time Arizona went to the Democrats. And now Biden is up 5%. So Biden's up 5 in Arizona. There's absolutely no way you could say that, Arizona's going red at this point. Maybe if, something random happens, let's say, it snows in the middle of the summer, but, we're past the summer, so it looks like it's a little too late for the Trump campaign to carry Arizona. Following a number of the comments that supposedly were said by the president against John McCain, the McCain family has already endorsed Biden. So first of all, that was something that the Trump campaign was never going to do. On top of that, McCain outran Trump in this state by 9% in 2016. There's absolutely no way to say that Trump holds a higher level of support than McCain in this state. And now it's going to the Democrats on both the Senate level and the presidential level. I went on a little bit of a tirade there in Arizona, but I think that my point was conveyed better than I could have if I was just talking about the state for a brief 13 seconds. Anyways, that leaves 101 toss-up electoral votes, and Biden is likely to get his win from the Rust Belt. In fact, not likely, he is absolutely going to carry the election through the Rust Belt. The reason for that is the fact that Donald Trump, like I said, has not gained on his 2016 support. While the Rust Belt I expect to be one of the closer regions in this country, I still think they will flip back to the Democrats. Michigan is comparable to the Indiana of, 2008. I think Minnesota is comparable to the Missouri of 2008. If you don't know what happened with Missouri, it was so close in Missouri. I think it was 0.13% that McCain carried Missouri by in 2008, and then 2012 rolls around and Romney carries it by 9%. So it narrowly moves down, as Minnesota did in 2016, but as we hit this election, we could see Biden carry Minnesota possibly larger than a lean margin. But I think Minnesota is actually breaking the, not conforming to the rest of these states. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania move over a characterization. Minnesota stays roughly the same. Michigan's the only one that's moved over too, from being tilt Trump to lean, not only lean Biden, but likely Biden. But the entire region itself is going to see increased support for Joe Biden. When we're talking about the issue of the economy, this was a very major issue to these voters. And take a look at the economy right now. And a lot of people do understand, yes, it's COVID-19. But when the Democratic Party plays those tapes that Trump was fully aware of COVID-19's threats and the threat to the economy, and only took precautions when we're talking about him giving the nation precautions 2 months later, when we see senators talking about how they were in a COVID-19 press discussion with the incumbent president back in January 29th. I mean, that's honestly very bad for President Trump, considering that the economy was one of the main issues that he won by in 2016 in these battleground states altogether. And Biden is going to give them a sense of, I'm actually the Obama candidate. It might not have been Hillary Clinton for you. You may not have respected her, but I am the one who, bailed out Michigan. I'm the one who's going to restore the economy. And Trump can't play the economy card because of the fact that his approval rating is only narrowly positive in terms of handling the economy, and it's negative with everywhere else. And believe it or not, we're not going to get a vaccine before November 1st, or at least we won't get an effective one. And it's going to be very difficult for Trump to turn this election around so quickly and so drastically, especially being underwater. Because if I did this based purely on the polling data, because someone's going to comment, because they're not going to get to this 17-point mark in the video, they're going to say he just blindly trusts the polls. If I did that, Michigan, would be a little bit larger of a margin than it is right now. Looking at Wisconsin, it would be a larger margin than it is right now. It'd be likely for the Democrats. It isn't in my map. Pennsylvania would almost be likely. If we're looking at Minnesota, this is another state. That's not Minnesota. That's Michigan. Biden would be winning in that state by a likely margin. But I do acknowledge that Trump is likely to do a tad bit better than what we're expecting, but it's not enough to win the election this time around. As we look at Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, Biden is probably going to carry this one, and honestly has a very weird history with centrist Democrats. Generally don't vote for progressives on House levels or anything past that, but Nebraska's 2nd district goes to Biden. By a lean margin, it's not going to be too safe. I mean, this always goes back and forth, just has a slightly red composition in this battleground district. So we have 60 toss-up electoral votes to go. Let's start off with the most Republican one. This is the state of Georgia. This is a state that Trump carried in 2016 by a pretty significant margin. He won it by 5.13%. So Georgia goes to the to the Republicans. He carries their 16 electoral votes by a lean margin, and that puts Trump at 204. So he breaks the 200 number, but it's going to be very difficult for him to expand off that 2016 number. Like I said, he has not gained voters from 2016. And when we talk about him losing support amongst suburban white voters, Georgia is a perfect representation of where these Romney and McCain-esque Republicans that were in love with the Tea Party, in love with the Republican Party prior to Trump, then, pushed away from him, even in 2016. In 2016, Arizona, Georgia, and Texas all moved to the left of where they voted in 2016. 2012, despite the rest of the country, and I mean the literal rest of the country, moving further to the right. That's because these states opposed Trump. Maybe he won a plurality in the primary in 2016, but at the end of the day, there was more opposition to his candidacy there than, overall support. And when we're looking at the presidential results, he underperformed Romney. And as much as Trump would like to say Romney is a loser, Romney would have Arizona and Texas and Georgia locked down this election. He may not have won the Rust Belt. He may not be able to win as well as Trump could be able to win. But, Trump isn't even the favorite to win this election. Biden's already 20 electoral votes past 270. So Georgia, perfect representation of where Trump is losing the white suburban vote. And honestly, if the Democratic Party was to hound on this state as much as they did in 2018, it could be a tad bit more competitive. But the pathway to victory does not lie through the South, unfortunately, for the Democrats. Or at least fortunately, actually, because, it's a lot easier for them to win back the Rust Belt than it is to win a state they haven't won since 92. So, moving over to North Carolina, I still think that Trump is the favorite to carry North Carolina. While Biden's numbers are okay in this state, honestly, I think that Trump is going to overcome this 1.1% lead. In terms of undecided voters in this state, they typically split 60-40 for the Republicans, which would be enough for Trump to overcome this state. And honestly, if we do see any type of narrowing before Election Day, it's going to be very difficult for me to draw a map where, Biden is able to carry North Carolina. At this point, I would say Trump is the current favorite to carry North Carolina. And Florida, what previously was characterized on my map as tilt for the Democrats, this is a Trump state he carried by 1.2% in 2016. Florida, I think, will go to the GOP. I think that Trump will narrowly carry Florida. What we've seen is that, yes, Biden is making up for a lot of his, marginal loss amongst minority voters, but Florida is where we see Biden get hit very hard. Nationally, Biden is losing Hispanic voters compared to Hillary Clinton's margin by, 1, 2, 3%. In Florida, we're seeing it in full force. We're seeing a number of Cuban Republicans, or at least Cuban voters, that typically split for the GOP. I mean, normally they vote for Trump. Normally they vote for Republicans, whether it's a Senate election or a presidential election. But we're seeing even more support for Trump here, not only amongst Cuban voters, but amongst the Hispanic demographic group in this state. And honestly, at this point, I would say Trump could narrowly carry Florida. Now, we have a lot to see with what Bloomberg's $100 million can do, but I will say that Trump being at, a certain point where he could carry Florida is a very good position to be in, especially since he's practically broke at this point. If he does get more money, we could see a narrowing up of the election. Now, this is a very good representation of also why the Republican Party does have an electoral college advantage. They might be down on the national average. Let's take a look at those numbers by 7%. But even on the electoral map, they still are only down from what? They're 22 electoral votes away from winning re-election this year. Anyways, I was just pointing that out. But overall on this map, Biden is able to flip 4 states, 1 district, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nebraska's 2nd district. Trump makes no gains. We have a number of likely, lean, and tilt states that ultimately could end up flipping one way or another before Election Day, but the safe states and probably the likely states are pretty solid at this point, and we won't see them waver too much before Election Day. 50 days out, people. Register to vote. Get your absentee ballot. Drive it in if you have to. Vote in person if you don't want to vote by mail because you don't trust it. Whatever it is, just make sure you do the most American thing possible, which is vote. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Check out my description box. I have merchandise up on my website. Just go ahead and check that out if you want to. I think the designs are pretty cool. I'm getting my sweatshirt sometime soon, so I'm really excited for that. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my other 2020 election predictions. This one ran a couple of minutes longer than normal. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.